Today, I'm joined by Sam Ross from Numeral. Me and Sam worked together at Airbnb, and Sam started Numeral in 2023 and did the winter 23 batch. I'm excited to have him here. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I remember when you first told me about Numeral, and you had the whole thing figured out. And it hasn't changed very much until now. It's basically the same plan. You were uniquely positioned to figure out this plan. Like, how did you know that sales tax, specifically for e-commerce in the beginning, was a big problem?
Yeah, I think a lot of founders have this like hero's journey of pivoting through the batch and hitting their head against the wall and then finally finding something. For us, it was very boring and like linear. I think I had known I wanted to do a startup for a while, but I really took my time to until I really landed an idea that I had a ton of conviction on, and so it wasn't just I didn't feel like I was forcing myself into starting something. So I think that helped. My background before this is I've been running bootstrap e-commerce businesses. And so, I run a jewelry business that did 30+ million in sales and I still own a vitamin gummy shop that does north of 10 million a year. And, as a bootstrap founder, you kind of have to do everything yourself. You don't have a big team you can delegate all the work to. And so the thing I hated doing the most was this very esoteric thing of sales tax compliance, where my small businesses, which were, 2-3 person teams, were having to file and pay taxes in 40 odd states in the US. And so I was personally dealing with Department of Revenue, Alabama, West Virginia, getting mail from these states.
Like manually, you were like what happens?
We use some software. So okay. Yeah, what you have to do if you're e-commerce and SaaS business as well, as you get to a certain scale, is yes, as a customer orders from you, sales tax is governed by local jurisdictions and states. And so you're not dealing with the IRS. You actually have to make sure on an order you're collecting the right tax rates and remitting it to these different states. I used the incumbent software, which I can talk about that, but I had a horrible experience. So that would really inform my decision here. Was the incumbent software was so bad. Yeah, I was filing taxes in West Virginia. I was on the phone with Department of Revenue West Virginia, getting an argument with some woman there about some penalty waiver she needed to give me.
Did everyone have to do this? Like everyone who does an e-commerce business basically have to do this?
Yeah, as you get to a certain scale, everyone has to do it. So it wasn't a problem in the past when I was starting my businesses, in 2017, I only had to worry about sales tax in California, where I was based. But there was a Supreme Court decision late 2018 that changed the rules. And after that, even if you don't have employees or you don't have a presence in a state, if you sell a certain amount of dollars into the state, that's when you have to register. So if you sell $100,000 or 200 orders into the state of Illinois, now you're liable to go and pay taxes there. And it's very complex. So in Illinois, software is actually tax exempt, so you don't have to worry about it. But guess what? The city of Chicago has their own rules, and you sell X dollars into Chicago, then you actually have to register with Chicago itself. And so there's all this, very specific complexity. And as a founder, it was literally the last thing I wanted to spend time on, right? It wasn't growing my business. It wasn't giving me energy calling these states. And the leading software in the market was from the early 2000s. It was really almost going through the sales process even was like a hostile experience. It felt like there were a lot of fear tactics. Yeah.
Why were those other softwares so bad?
So I think a couple of things. I think one is they were designed in a period before the Supreme Court decision. And so they weren't really designed for SMBs. They were really designed for like upmarket businesses. And I think they're also
charging enterprises, maybe charging enterprise costs, maybe.
Exactly. They're focused, they were building for these big corporate controllers, and the software was designed in the early 2000s. So there's sort of like a moment, maybe like 2011, 2012, where you're starting to shift in terms of like how software is built. But I think if it was built before this era, these things are built on .NET and just the user experience. Like there's just like the UX patterns don't really make sense. A lot of stuff hadn't been figured out. And so the biggest competition this company we compete with is called Avalara. They're owned by private equity. They just aren't really building software in a way you would in 2025. So a lot of the things that that have given us success, it's not necessarily like groundbreaking innovation. It's like taking the stuff and like delivering what you'd expect from high quality software and just like customer support and all these basic functions. If you do it well, often you can just win on fundamentals.
And you're one of the fastest growing companies since 2023 in YC. Would you say this is sort of like the market is accelerating at the same time, like more people need this and you have really good software compared to competitors? Like what would you attribute to sort of like the growth?
Yeah, good question. So I think, the market's growing. You always want to be selling into a growing market. And then I think on ours too, we just got, frankly lucky that that was one big competition was company Avalar. There was another one in our space called TaxJar. It was acquired by Stripe, and Stripe decided not to just own, practically sunset the product. And so sometimes you get lucky where I think it's a common pattern where the big players in the market get acquired and then they just totally stop innovating. They cut costs, they stop investing and even go to market functions, things like this. And that creates an opening for you to innovate.
Your first 2 companies or a couple companies were successful, like by any standard. Like that's a great results. However, this company, I think you had a different ambition than those 2 companies. Tell us about that. And you told me very specifically about that the first time we met.
So my background is we used to work together at Airbnb.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, I was like burnt out of San Francisco. And I want to just, I got out of like a 5-year relationship. And I was like, I just want to like travel the world. But to do that, this was 2017. There wasn't a lot of jobs that were going to hire me living in Tokyo or Rome, Italy, or somewhere like that. And so I needed a way to pay the bills. And so I saw the opportunity, direct-to-consumer businesses were becoming a thing at the time. And I saw that you could build these businesses bootstrapped. And so that meant I wouldn't have to report to anyone. I didn't have a boss. I could kind of work on my own schedule. And so, I ran this for a few years. I think it's very like these kind of cash flow positive businesses. But the challenge for me always was, a lot of direct-to-consumer businesses that you don't have the same retention that you would have in many like B2B or enterprise type of businesses. And so I had one business that like had a huge, we did tons of sales very quickly, a fast rise and then a fast demise because there was no retention. And so that always gave me some anxiety that even if I was making a lot of like short-term cash, like this could always go to 0 any day. And so I had a period where I met my now current wife and I was like, I need to build something. We were like house shopping and thinking about children. I'm like, I need to build something more durable. And at the same time too, I miss building software and I wanted the challenge of building something bigger. I think I was ready for it. I think it's interesting though, comparing, I had the experience building businesses that are bootstrapped and you build it in a certain way. You have to be very scrappy. So it's really hard on those dimensions, but on other dimensions, you don't necessarily need to get to huge scale. Like the total addressable market you go after doesn't necessarily have to be huge because you don't have investors. You don't necessarily need to become a public company. Whereas if you're building a venture-backed business, the expectation is you can build, a $10 billion plus business. And so you're always having to make sure, is my market big enough? The pressure is much higher.
Mm-hmm. It sounded like it was a very intentional decision. Probably a lot of people watching this, they built something that's more of a lifestyle business, and then they're like, I'm thinking I should do something that is much more ambitious. Like it sounds like for you, it was like an intentional moment for like, yes, this is what I want to do.
Yeah, exactly. I had thought about starting a venture-backed startup earlier in my career, but my first startup I worked at was this company Teespring, which had phenomenal rise and like phenomenal downfall. And I think I saw how it was really hard for the founders there. And so it kind of gave me a little anxiety to go and do the venture route because I knew it was high pressure. And so for me, I almost think of it almost like a marriage in some ways. And, it's like, okay, I'm going to commit to this. Maybe not, I guess marriage is for life. This is maybe for like 15, 20 years, but you really want to make sure you have conviction. You don't have other things in your life that you want. It kind of forces you to even like decision of where you live. Like I've met many founders, like they don't want to live in San Francisco anymore, but they can't leave because they're the CEO, their business is based there. So you really have to just make sure you're committed to it.
What did you have on the first day at YC?
We had very little. We had no software, probably almost no customers. Our business, we're doing sales tax compliance. We could execute in a way that was very, do things that don't scale and, hey, I'll go file someone's taxes by hand.
You did it before, you know what to do.
Yeah, I'd done it before. We actually didn't necessarily know what to do, but we figured it out on the fly. So, we went and sold a couple friends. They're like, hey, we can do your sales taxes for you. And we're like, oh shoot, how do we actually do this? We had calling, so we had to like go and, my co-founder was like calling up, I think it's like, remember DC, he was like on the phone and how do I file the taxes here? And so we were just figuring it out on the fly. So a lot of it was just, sell something we didn't even have yet. Figured out on the fly. In our case, we were lucky we could go and use Excel and you didn't need software. We didn't even have a dashboard until we had something like 20 plus customers. So I can go back and find all these early emails of mine where I'm like, oh, we're refactoring our dashboard. Don't worry, it's coming out soon. But the advantage we had is we actually had a lot of customer growth compared to a lot of other startups, which were building really interesting software, but didn't have anyone that was actually using it. So it was sort of like a very demand first approach versus like a software supply first.
How did you figure out how to sell to the first 20 people. You said Friends was the first one.
Yes.
After that.
Yes, we started with Friends. We tried to use our network, and that ran out really quickly. I remember like I would try some cold emailing. It worked really well for a couple days, but I didn't know how to do it right. So then everything started going into spam and big jumps in growth, and then all of a sudden like weeks where we couldn't figure it out because there's all this like tactical knowledge that I didn't have yet.
How do you think the YC batch Winter 23 shaped the company and maybe shaped you in a way?
When you go to YC, you're just around like some of the most ambitious people on earth. And so again, I had come from a background doing bootstrap businesses. We initially incorporated Numeral as like an S corp, meaning like we weren't even sure if we wanted to take investors. Maybe we'll like build a bootstrap business here. Everyone's trying to have some way higher ambitions than you. And you realize like, wow, maybe I'm just being like small brained here. And you have this kind of imposter syndrome. Like there's nothing really stopping you from building a really big business. It's not that like a lot of these other CEOs are more talented or smarter. They're just more ambitious and like willing to take bigger swings. And so I think being around that culture for me was really helpful.
Tell us about fundraising. I remember being on a bunch of calls with you at the end of the batch and you were fundraising. Had you fundraised before?
I'd never fundraised before.
I know the YC fundraising is different than other fundraising, but like, what are some learnings you have from fundraising early on? Or maybe like expectations that you had that turned to be true or not true?
Yeah, good question. So I think we had really good traction at the start. And so we came in expectations like, wow, we're gonna get like the fanciest firms and it's just gonna be like overloaded with term sheets or safes. And I think we ended up working out well. We got a lot of offers, but it was certainly, I had to take hundreds of calls in something like a 3 or 4 week period.
And lots of no's.
Most like 95% no's, right? And so I think, rejection is something that I think humans are just like maladapted for, and it's like it really gets to you. At that point, it was like kind of post-COVID, so I was working in my shed, and I had like my gym set up, and I was just sitting on like my gym mats, just like staring off into space for like 30 minutes. I was just so defeated because I think it was hard too. I'd take like 7 or 8 pitches in a day, and then I go eat some dinner, and then my actual work started. I had to go like talk to customers and fulfill our product, like starting at like 7 to 8 p.m. You have to just understand like what are the investors looking at, what are their incentives, how are they? You really have to want to get inside their brain. I think I probably didn't necessarily understand how they think well enough, and maybe there were some misconceptions there. You think coming in, hey, I have this fast growth, like hey, the data is going to speak for itself. But early stages, the data doesn't really mean, they don't care, but no one really cares about the data. I mean, maybe it's consumer app, traction, things help, but at the seed stage, it's really about the team, the market, and things like this, more so than your traction. I thought I could rely on my traction more.
And for people listening here who like fundraise and got a bunch of no's, like how do you not get discouraged and give up?
It's always going to be stressful and hard. And so I think everyone need, some people it's like for me, I do running. If I can find sauna, it's sauna. It's, it's just like this stuff, it's the self-help stuff. I think it's easy to like laugh about it or think it's like some low status thing to talk about. But in reality, if you don't do that and you're just working yourself, like you're going to get some level of burnout or exhaustion. And, there's a lot of people talk about crunching or they work in, crazy hours. And I think ultimately, this thing is a marathon, and like really what wins is just consistency of practice, and like, can you I think working crazy hard for like 2 years is probably much worse than working slightly less hard, but doing it for 10 years, right? These things compound. And so I think you have to just find what's sustainable for you.
One thing I'm always curious about with YC companies is as they grow, and how big is your company now?
We're about 60 folks.
60 folks. So how do you stay in touch with customers? Like how do you specifically don't lose track of what they think about the product or think about the company?
It's always a battle. For me, is a couple of things. I think one is, I'm always trying to jump on sales calls where I can. So, whether it's a direct intro to, like, often I'll get a direct intro to me, or even yesterday I was talking to a team here who I saw they booked a demo, and I didn't have to jump on the call, but I'm like, oh, I like this YC company, let me just join. And so it's always, I think, just helpful to either be on sales calls, or we use Gong, like actually spend time watching Gong recordings. We'll often just log into Intercom, which we use for CX, and you just go and read some tickets, and it's really insightful. So I'm not necessarily directly conversing, but I can see what they're writing in. And then invariably, when things go wrong, like customers are going to email you as the CEO, what's going on. And so, I think I always invite customers that are angry, like, please, I'm like, thank you so much for emailing me. I'd much rather you email me and like, I can solve this problem for you than just like go to CX and I miss it. But yeah, it's always a challenge. I think staying close to customers and, it's always super important. You want to have that empathy is really important.
You had the idea from a personal experience. So you experienced a problem. You're like, this is a company I'm going to go out and build. Like that doesn't necessarily mean you have product market fit. just those two things. You had to like get the validation from customers, or customers have to, like, there's probably a moment where you're like, okay, now I know enough about people that have the same problem. Like, when would you say that you're like, okay, I know this is going to work, let's build something big?
The biggest thing for me finding product market fit, I think, especially consumer, you get a lot more data, is like, it's not like when people tell you that they'll use it, it's like, will they actually like give you their credit card and give you their money? And so, before we applied to YC, we had people who were like willing to give us their money, and then we're like, oh, actually, we actually need a few more months. And so, but you want to make sure someone's like not just going to like test it, they're actually going to, I mean, in not all cases, but for many pieces of software, you want to make sure they'll actually pay for it. And so I think for me, it was like, wow, people will actually like pay for something that's thousands of dollars a month. The other thing that we saw product market fit is every time we layered on a new go-to-market channel, whether it was, something like Google Ads or was, like posting on social media, like each incremental thing that we added, like worked to a pretty good degree. And so I think that's how we knew you had product market fit. It wasn't like, oh, we just figured out how to mine customers this way but it won't last very long. It was kind of everything that we layered on, and like things, we would try different go-to-market tactics. We didn't even think that we're like, this won't work. And when it does, you're like, wow, that's how you know there's a need here.
And then after the seed round, you went on to raise a Series A from Benchmark, which is like one of the most famous investors of all time. How did that happen?
Yeah, we went out and fundraised in the middle of summer, which is never a good idea. People are off on vacation. That's when a lot of VCs they're off in their second home somewhere. For us, that's how the timing worked out. Yeah, we went out, and I got fortunate to got introed one morning to like the second day of fundraising to Chetan, our now board member at Benchmark. He booked a meeting like same day in the afternoon. Again, I don't think it was necessarily anything I did in particular. It was more like he like immediately within a few minutes understood what we were trying to build, understood the market opportunity. We had really good traction. And so for him, I think checked off boxes, and it was immediately for him kind of went into sell mode. And so that was like a really interesting experience, and a lot of learning from him, just how to even sell.
Do you feel like you, compared to seed round, had the leverage in this round?
Totally had the leverage. I mean, look, Benchmark's a great firm. Like, they're not going to pay some crazy exorbitant amount and things like this. But I just think it felt very different, right? Because once you get a term sheet from someone, or at least, that gives you leverage to go and shop or push back on that VC to give you more. And so in our case, he was going on vacation to with his family to India like the week after. It's like I knew he wanted to get the deal done. And so, we sort of just like set our terms, and we're like, hey, we'll get it done this week, like week 1, if you can meet us here. And we got there. And so, yeah, it felt way better than the seed round where it was like 4 excruciating weeks. So I think it's either really, really hard or really, really easy. It's never really in the middle. One of the two parties has the leverage there. And so I think, if you feel like you have no leverage, like it might even make sense often just to like, hey, let's pause, let's get back to work if we can, and go out later.
How do you think about the future from now? Like, it seems like this can be extremely big.
Yeah. So, obviously very ambitious. I think, we started with a very narrow idea to solve, which was, hey, we're going to help e-commerce businesses with their sales tax compliance in the US. I had these ideas, there's other countries, there's other markets, but we didn't really spend a lot of time, looking into it. But, after a number of months, we had a lot of friends that are software businesses, friends of ours asking if we could help them because, again, software is taxable in about half the states. And really early on, what we learned from a lot of software businesses is, if you're a software business, you're selling globally often on day one, especially consumer software. You have customers in Kosovo, in Kenya, everywhere. And so what that means is very early on, you actually have to think about what's called broadly indirect tax or VAT, like these kind of things that are similar to sales tax on a global scale.
Every European country has VAT.
Every European country has VAT, and it's very high, often like 20%. And the rules are, again, different in each country. And so what we realize is like if we want to actually build a product for software businesses, it can't just be our US product, it has to be a global product. And so that's something we're really excited about, is we're now serving customers in 60 different countries, and we handle everything for them, right? So we make sure we're calculating the right amounts, get them registered in Kenya, somewhere like that, go and actually do the ongoing filings. And we feel that no one's built a true global product that really handles everything, calculations, registrations, filings. And so for us, that makes us feel really excited that we're not really worried about is the market big enough? It's really, most of our things that get us anxious are really about like execution risk, like can we actually execute? Not, is there some big existential question around like, is the fundamental market there?
One topic I would love to talk about is Airbnb. So this is like a very special time in my career. Like I spent almost 5 years there. We worked together on the growth team, which I thought was a very special team at a very special company.
Totally.
At this event here, a lot of founders are actually ex-Airbnb. So like the Airbnb itself as an organization, like basically created a bunch of new companies. What do you remember about your time at Airbnb? Like, what was it like?
First of all, working at Airbnb was fun because the product's like amazing and so interesting. And so I think that's like the baseline, like energy and vibes, everything were good. And I think it's also when you work on a business that has like global network effects, it just makes everything easier and less stressful. And so I think just like the general energy in the companies and working at, I think there was also a certain like optimism of startups at that kind of period in the mid 2010s, and so it's just a good experience. And there was also just incredible talent density, like you're referring to. So I think if you can join a company where there's just like that level of talent density, it's gonna pay in dividends for years. Right? So I met you, and that made it much that made me excited to join Airbnb, to join YC. I probably wouldn't be here if I hadn't taken this step at Airbnb.
Is there anything specific you remember about your time at Airbnb?
The culture at Airbnb tended to be, I would say, very collaborative, and it was a very safe space to work in.
Yeah.
And I loved at Airbnb, it seemed like, there was really this sense of community there. And so I think we try to definitely bring that into our team, where we really try to cultivate a sense of community, especially in office in San Francisco. And so I think that, and then obviously, I think learning from folks like Brian, who, he scrutinized every single piece of software that went out and was really hands-on and never removed himself from product, I thought was always something to learn from, because this was like when eventually the company's 5,000 people, and anytime you ship product, it had to go through like founder design review.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that we've always had at Numeral too, is just, you just got to be so meticulous and detail oriented and OCD about the product. It's not that always the founder knows the best, but I think the founder has the most context. And so at minimum, I try to have a low ego around some of these things, but you do often have insights that are valuable, because like I'm talking to the sales team, I'm talking to customer support, and sometimes I can make connections for folks. And so I think just being really meticulous about any product you ship, I learned from Airbnb.
When you applied to YC, actually, there's one more thing that happened that you probably had not planned, which is the advent of LLMs. And I am imagining that they are very important for your company, and the last year and a half has made it fun and easier to build the software that you want to build. Tell us about that.
Yeah, LLMs have been, really huge impact to our business. Yeah, like you said, when we started the business, it was a few months after the initial kind of 3.5 moment. So we had some ideas. These incumbent softwares, we felt they were very much building you a tool to solve sales tax. And what we realized is, like, I didn't want a tool, I wanted a solution, a service, because often what we see customers doing is they hire an accounting firm. That accounting firm uses the sales tax software. And why do you need to have two vendors to solve this boring compliance problem? And so early on, our approach was, we see the AIs, these LMs are coming. At the time, there wasn't a lot of infrastructure, but our feeling was, let's do things that don't scale. Let's really do high touch service. So for example, an early feature we shipped is, hey, we'll scan all of your physical mail you get from all these different states and read it on your behalf. And we were just like, we were just ourselves like reading tons of pieces of mail. And then at a certain point, I trained up some team to read the mail. And then at a certain point, we had like two guys that were reading, their full-time job was reading thousands of pieces of mail a week. And we're like, wait, what's going on? Why haven't we automated this? And so very simple problem, like you scan a letter from the government. There's a very fixed amount of types of letters you can get. We can put them into buckets, can extract different information from that and create different workflows. And so you're going to take something that normally is that you have to have someone either on your team or an accounting firm that's reading government mail and like going and taking action on it. And this is just something that's now completely automated and obfuscated away for the customer. I think you're going to see a trend, a lot of these SaaS businesses where, again, often you're building tools for accountants or tools for lawyers. And in some cases, it can actually just do the whole job end to end. And the way the software works is, our software it's not really designed for people to spend lots of time into it. It's really more about how do we get as much of this problem done for you as possible so you don't even have to bother logging in. There's still work to go to get there for sure, but I think LLMs empower these kind of different user experiences.
Tell me about your co-founder, Matt. How do you guys work together?
Matt and I work very closely together. These founder relationships are always challenging, and I think it's hard to always see eye to eye on everything, but for whatever lucky reason, Matt and I generally tend to see eye to eye pretty closely on things. I would say broadly too, we probably need to get cleaner division of labor, but we often, I think for me, it feels like it's always someone who could be a sounding board. Like he was out recently for a week and it felt like I'd like left my phone at home and like things come up like to me, it's almost like a built-in therapist in some ways, right? Where it's like you see a thing like, am I crazy here? Am I thinking about this right? And we're just kind of talking throughout the day constantly. And just checking each other's work, and so we tend to be, I think everyone has different relationships. I think some folks maybe it works better to have clean division of labor, and you meet up here and there. For us, I think we collaborate on decision makings.
And you were both co-founders of separate companies before. He actually ran another YC company prior to Numeral, so I guess you had founding experience that you brought into this company.
Both had founding experience. Matt was very early at Stripe and very early at Notion. Right. And so those were like two very intense cultures. I feel like, I've learned a lot about like how Stripe operates or how Notion operates from Matt, right? So like Stripe had like incredible documentation culture and writing culture and things like this. And so for me, it's also just valuable to, kind of steal that DNA as well and kind of graft that onto the company. He learned directly from the Carlson brothers and from Ivan Zhao. And so often he's like, here, Patrick would do it this way or Ivan would do it that way. And it's really helpful for me to get that kind of coaching.
What motivates you to keep running this company when things are really hard? Or what motivates you and Matt to do this? I'm sure there's going to be moments or you've had moments where things were really hard.
For me, it's like a game running the startup. I grew up really nerdy with like fantasy sports, and you would take some actions, you see what happens, and you get feedback loop. And so for me, it sort of feels like this like a game. And so games get hard, but I think there's always a satisfaction that you can keep winning. And I think ultimately there's no turning back. And so I think if as long as you like know you're committed, like, and you're not questioning that, like you can get through the hard stuff. I think where it gets hard is if you're like, oh, I could quit or that option's there, then I think it makes it harder to stay. But like, we're fully committed. And so you don't even, often even when things are hard, you don't even question it just because it is the default, like, hey, I'm gonna be doing this for the next, 10, 20 plus years. And so that makes it easier I think once you're psychologically committed that this is what I'm working on.
If you were watching this right now, you're 20, 21, 22, graduating college, like what advice would you give yourself about how to spend the next 5, 10 years of your life?
It's hard to give advice to anyone. Everyone's different. I think, I really like my path was like worked at some startups, did some bootstrap stuff, got a lot of like travel out of the way. And then for me, it was very nice because I was like, I don't have FOMO about doing some digital nomad, doing some traveling. So it worked out well for me. And I think I've seen some people where they just jump into a startup in their early 20s and then they see their friends having fun.
Yeah.
But at the same time too, when you start a company in your early 20s, you have way more energy. Like you don't have to sleep as much. Yeah, my wife's pregnant. You don't have these type of things. And so everyone's experience is different. But for me, I think it was important that I like got a lot of stuff out of my system so that I could just be clear-headed and just like focused on that. Again, I think the biggest thing is like know what you're signing up for and make sure if you have anything that you want to get done before that, like get it done before that, right?
I've seen Numeral from the outside for like 2.5 years. It's been really, really impressive. Like it's like honestly like so cool to see like everything you said in the beginning on that first time we talked about the market and the problem like kind of turned out to be true. It's really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it was, I feel fortunate. I think I had some friends that like, they'd known me for the last few years, like selling jewelry online, these funny things. They're like, are you actually going to like build a serious business here? But we are. And I think, again, it's been helpful even YC, just the framing it like, hey, you need to have this level of ambition, like don't think small. And so it's been so fun to get to work with you again. It's been incredible.
I really enjoyed it. Thanks you for joining.
Thank you. It was so fun.